Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning and the very first thing you see is not the sunlight, not the quiet face of someone you love, not even the simple silence of your own breathing, but your phone, already buzzing with notifications, emails waiting, deadlines looming, people asking for answers you don't yet have. Stress greets you before you've even taken your first sip of coffee. For many of us, this is not a thought experiment, it is daily reality. But here is the question. If stress is so inescapable, what if we have been asking the wrong question all along? What if the real challenge is not how to eliminate stress, but how to transform it? In today's video, we're going to explore an idea that sounds radical yet timeless: stress as a teacher. A stern mentor that shapes us, disciplines us, and ultimately strengthens us. This perspective is not new. Almost 2,000 years ago, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius sat in a cold tent on the battlefield, surrounded by war and plague, and wrote words not for his empire, but for himself. You have power over your mind. A failing startup or a restless family dinner. Surprisingly, everything. Because the storm outside is not new. The faces change, the circumstances change, but the storm itself, pressure, uncertainty. Conflict has always been part of life. And throughout history, human beings have turned to philosophy, to culture, to psychology, to stories, searching for ways not to run from storm, but to stand inside it without collapsing. In this video, we will move between history and the present, between emperors and everyday parents, between grand battles and small domestic frustrations, and see how philosophy can be a compass. And here's the truth. You don't have to be a philosopher in a library to live philosophically. You can practice philosophy in traffic, in the middle of a heated meeting, in the moment before you snap at your child. Philosophy is not an escape, it is a form of training. Now, before we dive in, let me pause and invite you into something very practical. If you find value in these explorations, if you want more people to have access to ancient wisdom adapted for modern lives, hit subscribe if you haven't yet, because each week we're creating deep, long-form reflections like this, and I promise you, the journey is only just beginning. Share this video with someone you know is struggling right now. They may not say it out loud, but the right words at the right time can shift an entire life. And finally, if you want to go even further in supporting this work, there's a super thanks button below. Every contribution there directly fuels the creation of more thoughtful, ad-free content. And it lets me know that what we are building here matters to you as much as it matters to me. So let's walk together into this storm, not to be overwhelmed, but to become. As Marcus Aurelius might say, the lighthouse that still shines when the waves are highest. The day doesn't start with a sunrise anymore. It starts with the sound of an alarm threaded into a dozen other alarms, push notifications, calendar pings, a red bubble count that feels like a performance review. A colleague adding you to a thread that has somehow ballooned to 50 replies without a single decision in sight. The commute doesn't give you back your breath. It fills your head with a podcast you'll forget by lunch and a news headline that will nag you for days. By the time you sit down, why am I losing control? Stress in this world doesn't look like a singular crisis. It looks like 1,000 paper cuts, a calendar with no white space, a desk with 3 coffee cups and 2 unfinished to-do lists, the meeting that runs long and evaporates the buffer you were counting on, the email that uses phrases like just circling back but carries the weight of a threat. The brain treats these as small storms, but cumulatively they are weather, and you live inside them long enough to mistake them for climate. When people say they're overwhelmed, they usually don't mean one thing is crushing them. They mean a dozen small loads have made their mental posture impossible to hold. Busy people aren't inherently weak against stress. And one reorg away from losing the team she just finished building. She wakes to her phone because it's also her alarm, also her email, also her identity at work, the one place she's still trying to prove herself. She triages messages before brushing her teeth, approving one budget line, deferring a hire she believes in, and apologizing to someone for a delay she couldn't control. The day prepares for her like a storm prepares for a coastline. Her plan is a beautifully drawn map. Her day is the ocean. Min is a founder on his second startup who swore he'd do everything differently this time. He has investors who respect him enough to pressure him, a product that is good enough to be judged harshly. He worries about cash runway in the same way people worry about oxygen. Not constantly, but as a constant possibility. And then there is Marcus, a different century, and still carved out time to remind himself, in private notes he never intended to publish, that peace isn't found in the world's conditions so much as in the quality of his response to them. The question, why do the busiest often feel least in control, has a practical answer before it has a philosophical one. It begins with bandwidth. Attention is not a bottomless well. It's a narrow door that everything must pass through. When you try to force too much through it, what squeezes out first are patience, clarity, and creative thought, the very qualities you need to do hard work well. Add decision fatigue to that. Every small choice taxes the same muscle you need for the big ones. What will you eat for lunch? Should you accept this meeting? Does this email deserve a detailed reply or a quick thanks noted? Each choice pulls a little stamina from the battery. Then there is volatility. The gap between expectations and reality is where stress lives. We build lives that rely on timing and coordination, and then blame ourselves when timing and coordination, being human-made things, fail. It is tempting in this environment to dream of a world where all the stressors vanish. If only the inbox were empty, if only this project were over, if only the people in charge would finally get their act together. But the promise of a stress-free life is a mirage that keeps us walking deeper into the desert. Remove one set of pressures and another appears, because life is not a puzzle you solve once. It's a practice you repeat daily. Marcus understood this not because he was insulated from chaos, but because he lived inside it. He didn't write as a person who had figured out how to make the world calm down. He wrote as a person learning how to meet the world with the kind of steadiness that doesn't wait for ideal conditions. He knew that events are not, in themselves, insults or catastrophes. They become one or the other by the meaning we assign and the action we take next. This is not a call to disengage or to shrug at real problems. Stress can signal that something needs attention. It's the difference between watching metrics like a gambler watches a screen and reading them like a pilot reads instruments' inputs for decisions, not oracles to be obeyed. In leading a team, it's the difference between reacting to every complaint and designing the system that makes the next complaint less likely. What keeps the busiest among us on the edge is not merely pressure, but miscalibration. We overvalue what we don't control and undervalue what we do. We chase external validation because it feels scarce and urgent, and neglect internal alignment because it feels slow and quiet. We make plans as if they will immunize us from uncertainty, then are offended by uncertainty when it behaves like itself. The correction begins where Marcus began. Make a clean separation between what belongs to you and what doesn't. Your attention, but in carrying it into the next 10 minutes, and then the 10 after that, until your day is a chain of decisions anchored to the part you actually govern. Picture a morning scene pared down to its bones. The meeting you needed to prepare for was moved forward. Someone else's failure drops a task on your desk. Your body reacts before your mind does. A rush, a tightening, a voice that says we're behind. If you wait for the world to quiet down, you'll spend the whole day waiting. If you try to bulldoze the feeling, you'll carry it into every room. There's a third option. You step back not out of the day, but into a better vantage point. Ask, what is the smallest next action under my control that moves this forward? Not the perfect plan, not the comprehensive solution, just the next clean stroke. You answer the message that unblocks the team. You clarify the scope and write down exactly what done looks like for the next hour. You remove the hazy, ambient dread by turning it into a concrete verb. This is not glamorous, and that's the point. The drama is in the reaction. The work is in the response. People sometimes hear, choose your response, and imagine it means pretend you're not upset. That's not it. Choosing is not denial. It's direction. A doctor can acknowledge fatigue and still choose a checklist that catches what fatigue misses. Crucially, is built in ordinary minutes. Marcus didn't wait for clear skies to practice. He used the fog itself as the training ground. If you only practice composure when you feel composed, you are rehearsing nostalgia, not resilience. The modern version of this discipline requires one additional capacity: guarding your inputs. Marcus could retreat to his tent with a wax tablet. You carry a feed in your pocket that will happily set your nervous system on fire for the price of your attention. If you let your day be driven by whatever flashes, you will live at the mercy of algorithms designed to compel, not to clarify. One of the kindest moves you can make for your future self is to decide, in advance, what gets to interrupt you. Decide which channels are allowed to summon you instantly and which must wait. Decide when you will look at metrics and when you will not. Decide that some conversations happen in writing after reflection rather than in chat during adrenaline. These aren't productivity hacks. They're ethical choices about what you give your mind to. In a world eager to fragment you, boundaries are not rude, they are responsible. There's also humility here. Busy people often carry an illusion of control because they are competent. Competence makes the world move. It's intoxicating. But competence can trick you into thinking you can outrun reality. You can't. You will delegate and be misunderstood. You will plan and be surprised. You will shepherd a careful launch and watch a different issue erupt. If the goal is to stop these things from happening, you will be perpetually offended by how life behaves. If the goal is to meet them as a matter of course predictable in their unpredictability, you'll find your posture changing. Your language changes too. From, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "Of course this happens. What's the next right move?" This is not passivity. It's the readiness that comes from expecting the ordinary mess of human systems and still choosing to show up well. Think again about Sarah. Her day, at first glance, is a string of losses of control, a surprise escalation, a late deliverable, a conflicting directive from two leaders who don't talk to each other. Under pressure, she has two moves that look like opposites, but produce the same bad result. She can clamp down, micromanage every task, and try to drag the river by hand. She will burn out her team and herself. Or she can resign herself to being a victim of chaos, letting everything bounce off her with a cynical shrug. She will become slippery, professionally present but psychologically absent. The third move is more demanding and more mature. She names the part that is hers clear priorities for the week, two brutal no's that protect her focus. Honest updates that level with stakeholders and lets the rest be noise she cannot wish away. She stops trying to be a dam and becomes a channel. The current still roars, but she is now oriented to flow with purpose rather than brace in place. The entrepreneur learns a similar lesson from a different angle. Min thought he could set a culture by writing principles and repeating them. He found out that culture arrives in the micro behaviors people copy from the founder on his worst day. If he fires off panic messages at midnight, the team learns that panic is policy. If he turns every piece of feedback into a referendum on his worth, the team learns that truth is dangerous. If he faces a bad week with measured action speak to users, fix one critical bug, adjust a goal publicly, and explain why the team learns what it looks like to steer when the wheel shakes. His stress doesn't vanish. It becomes useful. That is the pivot, from stress as a tax on performance to stress as a teacher of priorities. It's worth pausing to make something explicit. None of this depends on being naturally calm. Some people are wired like a lake, and some like a river. The practice is available to both. There's a quiet kind of courage in choosing your reaction before the world chooses it for you. It looks like counting to 5 before replying when everything in you wants to win the argument by noon. It looks like checking a narrative for distortions before letting it become your reality. Are you catastrophizing? Are you mind reading? Are you turning a single data point into a verdict? It looks like accepting that some days will be heavy and still doing one thing that honors your standards. In this frame, control isn't something you seize from the world. It's something you exercise within it. And paradoxically, the more you practice that inner control, the more influence you gain over the outer outcomes that actually matter. Imagine asking. You can determine what quality of attention you offer, what integrity you insist on, how you will speak to people when you are under strain, which tasks are worthy of your best hours, especially when you do not feel like it. This is why the old question still hooks us. Can we learn calm from a ruler who lived 2 millennia ago? Not because his circumstances match ours, but because his strategy does. He used the pressure itself as training. He saw that a day full of interruptions is not an obstacle to composure. It is the necessary classroom. He understood that if you want a different feeling, you start with a different action, taken at the scale you actually control. He treated his title, with all its burdens, as evidence that no one is exempt from the inner work. If a man with armies and plagues on his calendar still needed to remind himself to answer like a human being and not a reflex, what excuse do the rest of us have? The modern office is not a frontier camp, and your project is not a war. But your nervous system doesn't care about historical accuracy. It cares about signals. The good news is you can send different ones without waiting for permission. Begin small and exacting. Choose 1 hour each morning where you initiate rather than respond. Choose a maximum number of priorities for the day that you will actually defend. Choose to define what good means for a task before you start it, so you don't outsource your satisfaction to someone else's vague approval. Choose 2 moments, a start and a stop, where you deliberately close loops so your brain doesn't carry them into dinner. These choices are not glamorous, but they are the tiny levers that move large days. If you're looking for a single sentence to carry into the next rush of pings, it might be this. You don't have to feel in control to act with control. The feeling may come later. Often it does. You can suspend your need for comfort long enough to take the next right step, and in doing so, create the conditions where comfort, if it comes at all, is earned rather than demanded. This is not therapy, not a trick, not a productivity stack. It is a way of being that takes your busy life seriously without letting busyness define you. It doesn't ask the world to stop being the world. It asks you to stop surrendering your agency to a tide that was never going to ask for your consent. And that, in the end, is how people who are stretched thin regain something like freedom, not by shrinking their lives until nothing can touch them, but by becoming the sort of person who can be touched by many things and still choose, again and again, the way they will answer. Marcus Aurelius has become a figure who transcends the usual categories of history. He was not just a Roman emperor, not just a soldier, not just a philosopher, he was all three at once. And in that rare combination lies the enduring fascination with his life and his writings. Imagine the weight of running an empire that stretched from Britain to the Middle East, facing constant war on the northern frontier, enduring repeated outbreaks of plague that decimated the population, and still finding the time, often late at night, in a cold tent on campaign, to write down reflections that were not intended as a public work, but as private reminders. What we now call meditations was, for Marcus, simply a notebook of personal philosophy, a way to wrestle with his own impulses, frustrations, and fears. It is striking that a man in absolute power still saw the need to remind himself to be humble, to remain calm, to accept suffering, to treat others with dignity. That paradox in Emperor talking to himself about restraint offers a clue to why his words have survived nearly 2,000 years. The central structure of Stoic philosophy, which Marcus absorbed from earlier teachers like Epictetus and Seneca, rests on a deceptively simple division. There are things within our control. It was about his own judgments, choices, and character. He wrote again and again that external events do not damage the soul, unless the soul chooses to interpret them as damage. Pain, insult, loss, these are facts of the human condition, but whether they become unbearable suffering depends on the meaning we assign them. To a modern reader, this can sound almost clinical, but Marcus was not dismissing suffering. He was trying to teach himself not to multiply it by adding resentment or self-pity on top of the unavoidable. Stress, from a Stoic perspective, is a prime example of this multiplication. The event itself, an approaching deadline, a financial setback, and illness does not have a built-in emotional weight. What crushes us is the story we tell ourselves about what the event means. A missed opportunity becomes a judgment on our worth. A colleague's criticism becomes a prophecy about our future failure. A downturn in the economy becomes the end of security. Marcus constantly reminded himself, strip away the story and see only the thing. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he wrote. This line, copied on posters and mugs today, was for him a survival mechanism. He was surrounded by events he could not control: barbarian invasions, senators with their own agendas, a disease that killed his co-emperor Lucius Verus, and yet he still had to function, to decide, to lead. If he collapsed under stress, millions would follow. His writings are not detached musings, but urgent exercises in self-preservation. What makes this philosophy even more compelling is the resonance it finds when compared to traditions outside the Greco-Roman world. In Buddhism, for example, the first noble truth is that life is full of dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately understood as dissatisfaction or unease. Like the Stoics, a harsh word is not just a vibration of sound. It is the wound we let it make in our ego. The Buddhist response is mindfulness, seeing clearly the arising of sensations and thoughts without immediately grasping at them. The Stoic response is reason examining impressions and testing whether they are true or within our control. Both traditions point to the same fundamental insight. Stress is created as much by our interpretation as by the event itself. Confucianism, though a very different framework, offers another point of comparison. In a chaotic political world, Confucian scholars emphasize the cultivation of exine, the heart-mind, and run, humaneness, so that a person could act rightly regardless of external disorder. The idea of rectifying the heart resonates with the Stoic insistence on keeping the inner citadel intact. For both, faced exactly the Confucian dilemma: how to maintain integrity while carrying out duties in a system that was often corrupt and violent. His solution was not to withdraw, but to engage with composure, to meet each day as an assignment from nature itself. When we place these philosophies side by side, a broader pattern emerges. Whether in Rome, India, or China, thinkers confronted the same human reality. The world is unstable, people are fickle, life is brief, and suffering cannot be entirely avoided. The answer was not escapism, but discipline of perception. The difference lies in the tools. Buddhists train meditation to observe the mind. Confucians stress ritual and moral cultivation to harmonize the self with society. Stoics emphasize reason analysis and constant reminders of mortality. The common thread is the refusal to let stress dominate the inner life. Bringing this into the modern context reveals its urgent relevance. Stress today often arrives not as a barbarian horde, but as an inbox that never empties, a phone that never stops buzzing, a market that never closes. Yet the principle is identical. These external flows will not stop, so the only meaningful place of mastery is the self. If we think of stress as an enemy to be eliminated, this paradoxical framing is what allows stress to transform from poison into practice. Consider the life of a modern doctor working in an emergency room. Every night brings waves of patients. Many situations outside her control: accidents, overdoses, sudden illness. If she interprets each tragedy as a failure of the world to be fair, she will collapse under despair. But if she accepts that the external cannot be fully managed and focuses on the quality of care, the clarity of decisions, the compassion of her manner, then the stress becomes the crucible in which her skill and humanity are proven. She doesn't control the arrival of the patient, but she controls the response. This is Marcus in scrubs instead of armor. Or we'll take a more ordinary example. A parent is juggling remote work while a toddler throws tantrums in the background. Deadlines loom. The internet connection wavers, and judgment from colleagues feels like a storm pressing on the walls of the house. The Stoic move is not to fantasize about a world where toddlers don't cry or work doesn't demand, but to separate clearly what is mine to control in this moment. Perhaps it is choosing to respond with a calmer tone. Perhaps it is arranging tasks differently. Perhaps it is letting go of an impossible standard of productivity. Stress here is not annihilated, but shaped into a test of adaptability. Marcus himself, in his meditations, recorded the inevitability of encountering difficult people, liars, arrogant men, selfish courtiers. He reminded himself daily, do not expect them to be other than human. By accepting in advance that the world will present stressors, he reduced the shock when they arrived. This anticipatory resilience is something we can borrow today. Expect the day to contain interruptions, and you no longer interpret interruptions as personal attacks. Expect the body to age, and illness becomes less of an existential crisis. Expect the market to fluctuate, and downturns become occasions for prudence rather than panic. The deeper implication is that stress, rightly engaged, is not only tolerable but formative. Muscles grow by resisting weight. Character grows by resisting despair. The Stoic does not wish for a stress-free life any more than an athlete wishes for a weightless gym. The tension is the point. Marcus, presiding over an empire, knew that ease was not his teacher. Adversity was. His writings are filled with reminders that life is short, death is certain, reputation fades, but virtue remains. That lens transforms stress from a thief into a sculptor, chiseling away what is unnecessary to reveal the form beneath. In today's language, we might say that stress is data. It shows us where our attachments are too rigid, where our expectations are too unrealistic, where our values are being tested. Instead of resenting it, we can use it. When your heart races before a presentation, it is not proof of weakness. It is a signal of care. When frustration rises in a long commute, it is not evidence that life is unbearable. It is a reminder that your peace cannot be outsourced to traffic conditions. When anxiety grows over economic shifts, it is not prophecy of doom. It is an invitation to clarify what financial security really means to you. The Stoic method is to pause, examine, and reframe. In doing so, stress becomes less of an enemy and more of a mirror. What makes Marcus Aurelius timeless is not that he discovered something unique to Rome, but that he articulated something perennial in the human struggle. The distinction between what we control and what we do not is as valid for a software engineer debugging code as it was for an emperor managing legions. The recognition that our interpretation shapes our suffering is as applicable to a teenager scrolling social media as it was to a philosopher confronting plague. The comparison with Buddhism and Confucianism shows that across cultures, the same insight reappears. If you want freedom, stop demanding the world change and start refining how you meet it. Stress is not the final word. The final word belongs to the stance you take. And so, the lesson of Marcus Aurelius for our own age is deceptively straightforward. The emperor who wrote to himself in a war camp is whispering across centuries the same reminder. You are not at the mercy of circumstance unless you consent to be. Control your mind, and it remains one of the most practical guides we have for living with clarity in a restless world. And multitasking is worn like a badge of honor despite the cognitive toll it exacts. A single day might involve answering dozens of emails, juggling project management platforms. They often note the paradox of productivity. We have tools, automation, software, digital assistants that should save time, but instead of freeing us, these tools expand expectations. Because you can technically send emails at midnight, you are expected to respond around the clock. Because project management software allows real-time updates, you are never truly off duty. Because smartphones tether you to work, every spare moment becomes a potential opportunity to catch up. This is why so many workers, even high-achieving ones, report feeling exhausted without being able to point to a single catastrophic event. Stress today rarely comes as one massive wave. It arrives as thousands of ripples, each too small to justify rebellion, but together enough to erode well-being. Psychology has given us language for this condition. Stress itself is a natural response. Our bodies release cortisol and adrenaline when we perceive threats, but chronic stress keeps these systems running beyond their design. Over time, this leads to fatigue, irritability, and health issues. Burnout, a word once reserved for extreme cases, is now casually used to describe the condition of entire industries. Burnout is not just tiredness. It is a state of emotional depletion, cynicism, and reduced efficacy. People report waking up already drained, going through the motions without creativity, and feeling disconnected from their sense of purpose. Neuroscience adds another dimension. Our attention systems are hooked into what some call a dopamine loop. Every new message, notification, or update offers a small hit of novelty, pulling us back for more. This creates the illusion of activity while preventing deep work. Instead of finishing important projects, we skim the surface of dozens of shallow tasks, ending the day busy but unsatisfied. To understand the nature of modern stress, it is useful to compare it with stress in other eras. Imagine a Roman soldier on the northern frontier under Marcus Aurelius. His stress was immediate and physical. Hunger, cold, the possibility of ambush, the weight of armor, the chaos of battle. Life could end in an instant. Now imagine a modern office worker. The threats are different. Job insecurity, competition, reputation, performance reviews, endless communication. The office worker is unlikely to die from a missed deadline, but the body reacts as if under siege. Elevated heart rate, tension in the shoulders, restless sleep, these are the physiological echoes of the battlefield. The Roman soldier faced lions. The office worker faces inboxes. The contexts differ, but the nervous system does not distinguish much between physical and psychological threats. The brain responds to a passive-aggressive email with the same fight or flight system it once used for wild animals. In both cases, the body prepares for survival. In both cases, resilience comes not from eliminating stressors impossible then, impossible now, but from cultivating inner discipline. Examples in contemporary life illustrate the scale of this invisible burden. Consider the CEO in the midst of a business crisis. A sudden market downturn wipes out revenue projections. Investors demand answers, and employees look for reassurance. The CEO must remain calm while making high-stakes decisions. Yet inside the storm is real. The fear of failure, the possibility of layoffs, the loss of reputation. If the CEO interprets these pressures as unbearable personal attacks, the weight becomes crushing. But if she reframes them as part of the role, focusing on controllable actions, communicating transparently, cutting unnecessary costs, rallying the team, she turns stress into strategy. The crisis remains, but her response prevents it from consuming her. Now consider the ICU doctor during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Each shift meant dealing with life and death situations. Families desperate for updates, limited resources, and a constant risk of personal infection. The stress here is beyond abstract. It is visceral. Many doctors and nurses experienced burnout so severe that they left the profession. Yet even in these circumstances, those who survived psychologically often did so by building what Marcus Aurelius would have called the inner citadel, an inner fortress of calm. They reminded themselves of their purpose, focused on the next patient rather than the overwhelming flood, and found meaning in small victories. Their stress could not vanish, but their stance toward it determined whether they collapsed or endured. Or take the example of a software developer facing an impossible deadline. The project scope was poorly defined. Requirements shifted daily, and management kept promising delivery dates to clients. The developer is caught between perfectionism and pragmatism, knowing that bugs are inevitable, yet fearing blame. The temptation is to spiral into frustration, to see each problem as evidence of incompetence. But the Stoic lesson would be to distinguish what is controllable, writing the cleanest code possible under constraints, communicating clearly about risks, refusing to take shortcuts that will harm users later. The deadline may still loom, but the developer retains dignity by focusing on process rather than panic. These stories converge on the same point. Stress is not an aberration, but a constant. What separates collapse from growth is the capacity to hold steady within the storm. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this as the inner citadel, reframing failures as lessons, setting boundaries around attention, and remembering that no single email or meeting defines the worth of a life. Stress, in this framing, is raw material. Handled poorly, it corrodes. Handled wisely, it refines. If we accept that deadlines will always multiply, that multitasking will always tempt us, that meetings will always feel endless, then the question shifts from how do I eliminate stress to how do I strengthen my response to it? This is not resignation. It is realism. Stress is not the enemy. The real danger is forgetting that our interpretation and reaction are within our control. When we learn to stand calmly in the midst of constant demands, we begin to see stress not as a gaping wound, but as a silent teacher, one that insists on discipline, clarity, and focus. In this sense, modern professionals are not so different from Roman soldiers. Both live under pressure. Both face uncertainty. Both are tested daily. And for both, survival physical then, psychological now, depends on the same truth. The fortress must be built within. The first decisive move against stress is not grand or dramatic. It is the quiet choice to respond on purpose. Marcus Aurelius approached pressure as a craftsman approaches difficult material, not by wishing marble were softer, but by training the hand to cut cleanly. The practical translation is a set of disciplines that convert adrenaline into clarity. The aim is not to sterilize emotion or pretend the world is gentle. The aim is to build reflexes that hold under heat. Negative visualization is a blunt phrase for a humane exercise. Before the day accelerates, you briefly picture the loss of things you take for granted. The deal falling through, the meeting derailing, the laptop failing, even the possibility that a relationship could be pulled away by a phone call you never wanted to receive. This is not self-torture, it is inoculation. When you pre-imagine setbacks, you strip away the shock that multiplies suffering. A parent on the way to a budget review can quietly consider that the proposal may be rejected, that political winds may shift, that someone may grandstand. By rehearsing the worst in a measured way, the parent walks in prepared to behave well even if the room behaves badly. In practice, this exercise works best when specific and contained. Picture the one meeting that matters today going sideways and decide in advance what a dignified response looks like. Decide that if a stakeholder gets aggressive, you will ask one clarifying question, summarize the disagreement without sarcasm, and move the decision to a documented follow-up. Decide that if your code review is shredded, you will mine it for constraints rather than treat it as a referendum on your worth. The power of negative visualization is not in scaring yourself. It is in pre-committing to conduct. When reality underperforms your fears, you feel gratitude instead of entitlement. When it matches them, you are not surprised into pettiness. You don't have endless drafts of today. That fact is not depressing. It is organizing. A sales director who carries this thought into a quarter stops confusing motion with progress. She trims meetings that are performative. She writes 2 honest emails instead of 8 polite evasions. She chooses to call a parent back now rather than later because the eventual grief will be cleaner if the present is tended. For people who need a concrete anchor, a small calendar of weeks left in an average lifetime taped inside a notebook is a ruthless tutor. You fill in 1 box every week. The boxes do not care about excuses. When you see them, you return to the only question that matters. What is worth your remaining minutes? Under that lens, the day's stress is not a fog that obscures meaning. It is the very pressure that reveals it. The control dichotomy is the hinge on which the rest turns. You separate cleanly what belongs to you from what doesn't, then concentrate your force accordingly. It can be as simple as a pocket card with 2 columns. Left side, controllable attention, effort, honesty, preparation, pace, tone. Right side, uncontrollable other people's opinions. The account manager does not perform anxiety in the inbox. He sets a clean deadline, offers 2 concrete options, and moves to the next account. This dichotomy is not a slogan, it is operational. It tells you where to spend the next 15 minutes. If the next 15 minutes are wasted, the day is usually wasted. If they are clean, momentum compounds. You commit to finishing your sentence without heat and then giving them a full minute to speak. If you know a meeting has ambiguous ownership, you draft the sentence you will say when the room starts circling. Let's decide who owns the next step and what done means by Friday, 5 p.m. At night, you write without self-defense. Where did you overreact? Where did fear masquerade as urgency? Where did you confuse volume with impact? You don't perform guilt, you extract patterns. A one-line ledger, what I control today. Why didn't keeps you honest? Over weeks, you stop being surprised by the same triggers, and your responses move from improvisation to craft. These inner practices become visible in the way you manage time. The calendar is not a museum of meetings, it is a battlefield map. If your role demands thinking, you create a daily block where you initiate rather than respond. That block is immune to quick syncs and 5-minute asks, because you have decided that the integrity of your work is not negotiable. You align tasks with energy curves, analysis and writing when your mind is sharp, admin when it dips. You plan buffers because you respect reality more than you worship plans. A 20-minute buffer after 2 heavy meetings is not laziness. It is the oxygen that keeps the third meeting from inheriting the emotions of the second. Because nothing corrodes morale like the calendar equivalent of water torture. Conflict is where many people's ideals evaporate. A Stoic response is not silence or passivity. It is precise speech and disciplined listening. The technique is simple enough to practice under pressure. You state facts without adjectives. You name your own feelings without outsourcing them. You express the need at stake, and you make a concrete request. A design lead faced with a hostile comment in a review can say, "Can we walk through the user journey and capture specific points of confusion?" This structure does not guarantee agreement, but it prevents the conversation from devolving into contempt. And lower temperatures unlock better decisions. Mindfulness complements Stoicism by training attention at the granularity where reactions are born. If you can notice the exact moment a surge arrives in your chest or throat, you are no longer carried by it. You're meeting it. A practical integration is the micro pause. When a message hits and adrenaline spikes, you sit back in the chair, place both feet on the floor, and follow the breath. Twice inhale through the nose. Exhale through the mouth, feeling the ribcage move. While you breathe, you label the state in 1 or 2 words: anger, fear, urgency. Naming is not magic, but it moves activity from the limbic system toward the prefrontal cortex, and that transfer is the gap where choice lives. In that gap, you deploy the control dichotomy. What part of this is mine? If the answer is craft a 3-sentence reply with a clear question and a deadline, you write it and leave poetry for later. If the answer is do nothing until 3 p.m. when I have facts, you calendar that time and close the thread. You are not suppressing emotion. You are channeling it into behavior that honors your standards. Breathing is not a metaphor. It is a lever on the nervous system. There are 2 simple protocols worth memorizing. The first is the box. Inhale to a slow count of 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. Repeat 3 or 4 cycles. The count is less important than the evenness. This pattern signals your body that the situation is demandingly safe rather than existentially threatening. The second is the physiological sigh. Inhale through the nose, then take a small top-up inhale to fully inflate the lungs. Then exhale slowly through pursed lips until empty. 2 or 3 of these can lower the sense of being flooded. You can do them on mute in a meeting without anyone knowing. No philosophy is sturdy under oxygen debt. When breath steadies, you create a friction point. Draft the message in a notes app that has no send button. Read it once out loud. If your tone would embarrass you on a screen in front of your team, you fix it. You assume the other person is 20% more reasonable than your worst interpretation allows. If the issue is complex, you prefer a short call with a shared document to a chat war that will generate more heat than light. You schedule the call for a time when you're not sprinting. You state at the top what decision is needed and by when. You define how you will follow up in writing. None of this is grand. All of it is uncommon. The average workplace rewards speed and punishes care until a fire breaks out, and then begs for the care you refuse to practice. You practice anyway. A leader facing a communications crisis provides the clearest field test. Imagine Lena, the chief operating officer of a consumer app used by millions. Late on a Thursday, the security team detects an exposure of user data in a third-party library. The facts are ugly but bounded. Social media notices. A journalist emails with pointed questions. An investor forwards a thread with a subject line that might as well read, "Explain yourself." Inside the company, Slack fills with speculation, and managers are asked for answers they don't have. This is the moment when many leaders oscillate between panic and paralysis. Lena sits in a conference room with the head of security, legal, PR, and product. Her first move is internal. 2 cycles of the physiological sigh. Her second is the controlled dichotomy written on the whiteboard. Left side, what we control today, facts we can verify, our tone. What we do not control, speculation on the timeline. Hot takes on Twitter, the exact headline tone. A rival founder's snark, the next hour's rumors. She refuses to debate the right column. Negative visualization becomes a planning tool. She asks the team to imagine the worst plausible coverage tomorrow morning. They draft that headline. They write the body as if they were the journalist. Then they design their response to address what would make that headline fairer. This converts fear into checklists. Patch and verify with third-party audit. Force password resets. Publish a clear timeline of discovery and remediation. Notify regulators before the article drops. She records a short video for the company that evening. She looks into the camera and explains what happened, what will happen tomorrow, and how people can help without spinning. The narrative is still rough, but the bleeding has slowed. Over the next week, churn is real but not catastrophic. It was metabolized by a team that refused to squander attention on what could not be controlled and refused to surrender decency when cornered. Not every stressor is a headline. Most are ordinary. You decide you would rather ship a smaller promise you can keep than a larger promise that corrodes trust. You notice envy rising when another team gets praise, and you breathe twice before you speak. You ask a direct question that resets the conversation from status theater to outcomes. What problem are we solving by Friday, and what will we agree to drop to solve it? You journal that night about the trade you made. Did you choose short-term applause over long-term credibility, or did you do the unpleasant correct thing? Slowly, you become the person others look to when the room heats up, not because you are the loudest, but because you're the least hostage to the temperature. Time management in this frame is not about color coding, it is about ethics. You decide that your best hours belong to your best work, and you defend them the way a professional defends any scarce asset. You choose 2 or 3 real priorities per day and accept the opportunity cost in public so that the team can see how adults choose. You bundle shallow tasks and dispatch them in a single window rather than letting them erode the day in fragments. You write decisions down because memory under stress is untrustworthy and because writing is how groups coordinate without drama. You make peace with the email you will never write and the meeting you will never attend, because anyone who says yes to everything is lying to someone, usually themselves. There is a temptation, when adopting practices like these, to imagine that mastery will remove discomfort. It won't. The point is to suffer less uselessly and to convert more stress into skill. You can expect conflict and still play the ball, not the person. The inner citadel Marcus described is not a moated castle where nothing gets in. It is a disciplined town where visitors are screened at the gate. The world will knock. You decide who enters. In American offices, the examples stack up. A teacher in a tough district begins class with a breath and a question instead of a threat. The room changes its posture. A nurse on a double shift writes the 3 sentences she will say to a family before she walks in. The conversation avoids chaos. A contractor loses a bid and writes a better template for the next proposal rather than stewing. Revenue moves the following quarter. A mid-level engineer watches priorities flail and proposes a weekly decision review with a written log. The team gets 20% of its time back within a month. None of these people controlled the weather. All of them learned to sail. On paper, these practices are simple. In practice, they have to be earned daily. You will forget. You will send a sharp email. You will schedule over your own thinking time. You will avoid the hard conversation and pay interest on the avoidance later. The work is not to be perfect. It is to shorten the distance between noticing and correcting. You breathe, you write, you separate control from concern, you act. You do it again tomorrow. Over time, Marcus Aurelius provides perhaps the clearest example of philosophy practiced in the heat of real life. He was not writing in a quiet study, detached from conflict. He was on military campaigns along the Danube frontier, where Rome faced constant raids from Germanic tribes. Supplies were scarce, winters were brutal, and disease was common among his troops. Amid that pressure, Marcus did not produce speeches meant to inspire citizens or propaganda meant to glorify Rome. He wrote notes to himself, in Greek, to remind his own mind of composure. He reminded himself daily that other people would be selfish, arrogant, and ignorant. He told himself not to be surprised by misfortune, because misfortune is the rule, not the exception. What makes his writings powerful is that they were not designed for anyone else's eyes. They were self-medicine. Imagine being surrounded by war, hearing rumors of betrayal in Rome, knowing that plague was wiping out thousands, and still having the discipline to write. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This is philosophy as a survival kit, not as a luxury. The battlefield tents were his classroom, and the lessons were meant to keep his sanity intact. His example shows that philosophy was never meant to be an ivory tower discipline. It was a shield forged in chaos. A similar resonance appears in Abraham Lincoln during the American Civil War. Lincoln, like Marcus, bore responsibilities so heavy that many nights he could not sleep. Letters from generals, pleas from families. It became the fire that refined his leadership. Cultural examples provide another dimension. In Japan, the concept of gaman reflects an almost stoic embrace of endurance. To gaman is to bear the unbearable with dignity, to remain calm and resilient in the face of suffering. This cultural value is visible in many aspects of Japanese society, from the collective response to natural disasters to the patience shown in everyday inconveniences. After the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, images of orderly lines for food and supplies struck the world. There was no looting, no chaos, but a collective practice of calm that is not accidental, is cultivated. It means valuing harmony above conflict. In villages, families, and even business settings, this principle encourages people to absorb offense rather than escalate, to maintain community peace rather than win every argument. While at times criticized as avoidance, it also has deep wisdom. Stress in relationships often comes from unnecessary clashes of ego. Or a neighbor who lives by dichotomy may swallow certain frustrations, not because they are weak, but because they see the larger picture of long-term cooperation. This resonates with Stoicism, where Marcus reminded himself daily not to be shocked by rude or selfish people, but to remember that they act out of ignorance and weakness, instead of being drawn into bitterness. The Stoic stance is to conserve energy for what truly matters. Cultures around the world, though different in expression, often arrive at the same pragmatic insight. Inner steadiness is more valuable than outer victory. The lessons come alive in everyday modern life. Picture a father in his 30s, working full-time while raising 2 young children. He is tired when he gets home, deadlines still whisper in the back of his mind, and the noise of children is constant. It would be easy, even natural, to snap when toys are scattered, when homework is delayed, or when bedtime turns into chaos. The stress is real. But he recalls a line from Marcus: "You have power over your mind." He breathes, slows down, and chooses not to yell. Instead, he kneels, speaks calmly, and helps put toys away. It is not about suppressing anger. It is about realizing that anger does not solve the task. It only adds guilt on top of fatigue. But his response transforms it into a lesson for himself and his children. This is philosophy practiced on the living room floor, not just in ancient books. A startup employee offers another case study. She joins a young company full of energy, believing in the mission. But as often happens, the product fails to gain traction, funding shrinks. What is within her control? She can learn every lesson the failure offers: how to run experiments, how to talk to users, how to handle scarce resources. She writes reflections in a journal. Much like Marcus did, not to polish her image but to process her mind. She practices negative visualization, imagining that she might lose this job, but remembering that skills and character cannot be taken. When the company finally folds, she carries scars, but also insights that make her stronger for the next venture. Stress has not been an enemy. It has been a stern teacher. Years later, when she leads her own team, she brings a calm presence that comes not from luck, but from the crucible of failure. The thread that connects these stories is the transformation of stress into growth. Philosophy, psychology, and management theory converge on this point. Psychologists describe post-traumatic growth, where individuals emerge from crises with deeper appreciation for life, stronger relationships, and clarified priorities. Stoics described it centuries ago. Obstacles become the way. Management thinkers, too, note that resilient organizations are not those without problems, but those that learn and adapt from pressure. A company that survives a crisis of trust becomes stronger if it builds transparency. A leader who navigates conflict becomes wiser if they integrate empathy into decisions. Stress is the test that reveals the quality of systems, whether in a nation, a culture, a family, or an individual. What these diverse examples show is that philosophy is not abstract theory, but practical navigation. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his tent. Lincoln wrote speeches in the White House. Japanese citizens practice gaman in disasters. Vietnamese families practice dichotomy at dinner tables. Modern fathers breathe through tantrums. Startup employees endure collapse. The contexts differ, but the principle is identical. Life will deliver stress. The question is whether stress becomes corrosion or refinement. Philosophy provides the lens. Psychology explains the mechanism, and management provides the structure. Together they point to the same conclusion. Stress is not a foreign invader to be destroyed, but a force to be integrated. It is the test that helps a person grow into someone steadier, wiser, and more humane. Stress is not something that can ever truly be eliminated. It is stitched into the fabric of human life. And many other thinkers across time and culture try to remind themselves of again and again. A modern professional may wish for a life free of pressure, deadlines, or conflicts. But that is no more realistic than a Roman emperor hoping for a reign without war or plague. To live is to be tested. The only freedom we can claim is the freedom of our reaction. Yet every generation rediscovers the same truth. The outer world does not cooperate with our fantasies. The inbox never stays empty. Markets never remain stable. Politics never become serene. Those who pin their peace on external conditions are like sailors waiting for a windless sea before they raise their sails. They will wait forever. The Stoics offered a different image. Build an inner citadel that cannot be shaken by storms. This citadel is not built of stone, but of habits of mind awareness, discipline, perspective. If you can control your judgments, your words, and your actions, you already control the part of the universe that is most important. To demand that the external world behave is to surrender your freedom. To govern your response is to reclaim it. This is where philosophy becomes more than abstract speculation. It becomes survival training for the overburdened. The busier one is, the more urgently one needs these tools. A person with few obligations can afford to drift with moods, but the executive making decisions that affect thousands, or the parent trying to model calm for children, or the doctor juggling patients in crisis, these people cannot afford to collapse every time stress arrives. They need principles that anchor them. Philosophy, especially Stoicism, gives them framework. It tells them not to expect an easy road, but to become the kind of traveler who does not panic at every bump. Without this framework, busyness corrodes into burnout. With it, busyness can be transformed into meaningful service. If we step back and view stress as a teacher, its lessons become clear. Stress teaches us humility by showing us that we cannot control everything. It teaches us patience by forcing us to wait when outcomes are outside our hands. It teaches us resilience by putting weight on our shoulders and daring us to strengthen. It teaches us perspective by reminding us that what feels catastrophic today may, in a month, shrink into a footnote. Unlike a gentle tutor, stress is harsh, even brutal. It is not grade on a curve, but those who learn from it emerge tempered. Just as steel becomes strong only after it is exposed to fire, character becomes firm only after it has survived stress. This is why so many people, when reflecting on their lives, point not to easy times but to hard times as the periods when they truly grew. Think of a young professional overwhelmed by their first major project. At the time, the stress feels unbearable: late nights, fear of failure, constant scrutiny. Yet years later, that same person may say, "That project was where I discovered what I was capable of." Stress did not vanish, but it revealed capacity. Think of a family that endured financial hardship. The stress was real, but in hindsight, they say, that period taught us to be grateful. A couple that navigates illness or loss together often discovers a depth of bond that would never have been forged in comfort. Stress reveals whether foundations are strong or brittle. In organizational life, the same applies. Companies often discover their culture only under stress. A business that treats employees as expendable may maintain a facade of community in good times. But when crisis comes, the truth emerges. Another business, guided by principled leadership, may face the same crisis but respond with transparency, care, and resilience. The stress exposes, but also refines. Leaders who panic, deflect blame, or hide information destroy trust. Leaders who stay calm, admit mistakes, and keep moving forward strengthen it. Stress is the crucible that separates rhetoric from reality. Psychology supports this ancient intuition. Research on resilience shows that humans are remarkably adaptable. Post-traumatic growth is a documented phenomenon. Many people emerge from intense stress with greater appreciation for life, stronger relationships, and clarified values. The very pressure that seemed unbearable at first becomes the catalyst for transformation. This does not romanticize suffering. It acknowledges that while suffering is real, it can be given meaning. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, observed that human beings can endure almost anyhow if they have a why. Stress alone can destroy, but stress integrated into a sense of purpose becomes bearable, even formative. The Stoics knew this long before psychology had a term for it. What makes stress such a severe teacher is its refusal to let us live in illusion. Comfort allows us to imagine that we control more than we do. Stress strips that away. Comfort lets us assume that time is abundant. Stress confronts us with urgency. Comfort whispers that we are self-sufficient. Stress shows us our dependence on others. These are painful lessons, but they are real. A person who has never faced stress often remains fragile, mistaking convenience for strength. A person who has wrestled with stress learns what they can endure, what they must let go of, and what really matters. The final image that captures this philosophy is the lighthouse in the storm. The sea will rage, the storm will come, the waves will crash. The lighthouse does not control the storm. It does not demand that the sea be calm. Its job is to stand, to shine, to give orientation when everything else is chaos. To be that lighthouse is to accept stress as permanent weather while refusing to let it extinguish your light. For a parent, that means being calm in front of anxious children. For a manager, it means being steady when the team wavers. For a citizen, it means holding integrity when society is divided. The lighthouse does not escape the storm, but it is not destroyed by it. That is the role stress plays in our lives. It provides the storm against which our strength is proven. In the end, stress is not merely an obstacle to happiness. It is part of the texture of a meaningful life. To imagine a world without stress is to imagine a world without growth, without responsibility, without urgency, without bonds tested and strengthened. The task is not to flee stress, but to face it with philosophy, to meet it with practices that center the mind, and to treat it as a stern instructor rather than an unjust enemy. Stress is a teacher that never leaves the classroom, and its lessons, though difficult, are indispensable. Between what we cannot control and what we can, between the outer storm and the inner citadel, lies the space where our lives are written. The challenge of stress is the same challenge of life itself. To respond with courage, humility, and composure, to endure without bitterness, and to shine like a lighthouse so that others may find their way. We began today with a question: is stress an enemy, or can it be a teacher? After walking through the lives of emperors and presidents, after looking at the cultural wisdom of Japan and Vietnam, after stepping into the homes of busy parents and the offices of overworked employees, perhaps we now see a pattern. Stress never leaves. It appears in every age, every culture, every circumstance. The only difference is what we do with it. Marcus Aurelius did not hope for peace in order to practice philosophy. He practiced philosophy in the midst of war. Abraham Lincoln did not wait for a calm nation to speak of unity. He spoke of unity in the middle of civil war. Japanese communities did not practice gaman in times of abundance. They practiced it in times of disaster. Vietnamese families did not create di hoa six qui when all was easy. They lived it precisely when tensions could have exploded. And modern fathers, modern workers, modern leaders, all of them, all of us, discover that stress is not a wall to break through, but a mirror showing us who we really are. So what does stress teach us if we allow it? It teaches us that control of the outer world is an illusion, but control of our response is always possible. It teaches us that time is finite, and so we must choose carefully what deserves our hours and what is not. It teaches us that ego, when untrained, will flare into anger and panic, but when disciplined, will bend into patience and resilience. It teaches us that the inner citadel, the calm fortress inside us, is more real, more durable than any position, paycheck, or possession we might cling to. And this is where the image we carried throughout becomes real. The storm is not going to end, but you do not have to be the ship tossed and broken on the waves. You can be the lighthouse. You can be the steady point that others orient themselves by, the calm voice in a room of panic, the person who does not run from responsibility but meets it with composure. You will still feel the storm, but you will not be destroyed by it. That is what it means to treat stress not as an enemy, but as a teacher. A strict teacher, yes, one who does not grade gently, but a teacher who shapes you into someone stronger, someone clearer, someone truer to yourself. If you have stayed with me until now, it tells me something important. You are someone who is not afraid of depth, who wants more than quick tips or shallow distractions. You are someone willing to wrestle with hard truths in order to live with greater strength. And that inspires me, because creating these videos takes time, energy, research, and reflection, and I do it with the hope that somewhere, someone is changed by them. So here is my invitation. Once again, if this video has given you even one insight, one moment of calm, one spark of recognition, then please like the video right now. It signals not just to YouTube's algorithm, but to me, that these words reached you. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey with us. This is not a one-time conversation, but an ongoing exploration of philosophy for real life. Share this with someone who might be silently battling stress, someone who needs to know they're not alone, and that philosophy has been waiting for them all along. And if you want to go further, if you want to directly fuel this work, click the Super Thanks button. Every donation, no matter the size, is both a practical support and a moral encouragement. It allows me to keep this channel free of shallow noise and focused on depth. So as we close, I will leave you with one image. Picture yourself standing on the shore. The sky is dark, the sea is violent, and the waves are rising. You cannot stop the storm, but you can decide, will you be the ship tossed and broken, or will you be the lighthouse, steady and shining? My hope is that you choose to shine not just for yourself, but for everyone who needs your light. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next video.